Welcome, everyone, to a new episode of Post-PhD Directions, the podcast that helps early career researchers navigate the transition from academia into industry. So whether you're just wrapping up your PhD or you're exploring new horizons beyond the lab or the lecture hall, actually, we're here to share stories, strategies, and insider insights to guide you in your next steps. And today, I'm really excited. It has been a while. But I'm again joined by my co-founder, Angela Priest. And most of you know her, but for everyone who's new to the podcast, I want to give a short intro. Angela has over plus 20 years of hiring experience across different industries and different company sizes, really from startup to Fortune 500 kind of giants. And she's seen hiring trends come and go, but 26 is providing to be a particularly interesting kind of year for PhD candidates and postdocs to make the leap into industry. And we're going to dive into everything what you need to know about the job market in 2026. And with this, Angela, welcome to the podcast.
Yay! I'm so glad to be here. It's been too long, and I always get excited when I get the opportunity to come on these.
Yeah, I mean, I think it has been too long. I agree on this. We should do it more often. But I'm
I
really
need to
happy that
come up out of the basement and talk to you more.
Yes, exactly, Angela. So, but we're a bit late. It's end of February, right? So I wonder what are you seeing in the job market, and what do you think is important for PhDs to know or understand of what's happening currently?
Yeah. So we're seeing, a lot of changes both last year and this year in terms of how the job market operates. I think last year was a really interesting year. We had an election in the US and we've kind of got a fluctuating political climate in the US that is creating some uncertainty for employers. Employers don't like uncertainty. The first thing that stops when there's any kind of uncertainty in the market is hiring. And so we saw a lot of that last year. And every time there was a policy change or something changed in the political climate, we would see kind of these large stoppages in the hiring pipeline as companies reconfigured and readjusted. And sometimes it felt like it was happening on almost a daily basis. And so that kind of threw the job market into this weird like push and pull of, are there jobs? Are there not jobs? We saw a lot of people who would get offers and then the offers would be rescinded, that type of thing, which is obviously not a great feeling for candidates. But I think one of the things that's changing this year is uncertainty is almost becoming normative for companies. And so we do see those little shifts and fluctuations, but the kind of time band around them is much shorter so far this year. So that's one of the big things that's changed. I also think that we're kind of in this space race right now around data. And it started when ChatGPT had the big launch that they had, but companies were really trying to figure out, how do we use AI? And there was all this hype around it's going to replace human workers and all of this stuff. And as that hype starts to settle and companies start to really understand, here's how we can use AI and here's how we can integrate it into our companies and our systems, you're seeing some of that chatter like kind of filter out. The main people who are saying it are the big like founders in those spaces who need to keep their hype cycle going. But I think you're starting to see that settle down a little bit, and you're starting to see companies realize that AI is a really effective augment to humans. It's not a replacement for humans. So, for example, last year in the medical communications space, we saw that space being absolutely decimated by the use of Gen AI. And as kind of more news came out about, errors and things like that that pose really high risk to companies came out, I think you're starting to see companies be a little more conservative. And so I think what's starting to happen is companies are kind of more conservative in their future look on AI, but we still have this data boom going on where the companies who are able to use that technology effectively, I think everybody recognizes that those are going to be the top players. And so we're seeing an increase in, machine learning, AI-based hiring. We're seeing an increase in kind of hiring around people with data fluency, even in roles that are traditionally data oriented, like, or non kind of AI or algorithmically focused, like clinical research. We're starting to see a real boom there. And again, just early signs and kind of signals that those are going to happen. And so I think we're kind of in this space of transformation where companies are trying to figure out how to get more efficient, how to get more kind of out of their teams and their staff through the use of AI. And I would say that's probably the biggest overall trend that I see, and I expect that to continue into this year as the tech around AI continues to expand and kind of as its capabilities get blown out.
I do have a follow-up question actually regarding what you just said in terms of, companies, they thought, oh, we can use all of this AI, and then they realized, oh, actually, we still need a human behind it, right? So there was a lot of talking about that it's really hard for fresh grads or for anyone actually to get into entry-level jobs. And people were really fast to blame and say, oh, it's because of AI and entry-level jobs are going to disappear. I actually watched a video with I think it was the LinkedIn CEO, and he actually said they see that hiring has gone down across, like, it's not only people talk about, oh, it's entry-level jobs, AI is taking over, but in reality, there was a decrease in hiring across all levels. So it's not only the entry-level jobs, but I want to hear because I know this is something a lot of people fear. Entry-level jobs are going to disappear. They're going to replace us all. Please enlighten us a little bit. What are your thoughts on this development?
Yeah, and I have a more conservative view probably on that than most, just kind of being a deep user of AI. And what I think is it's not going to eliminate entry level roles. I think it's going to change the shape of them. And I think the definition of what entry level means is going to have to shift, particularly when academic institutions are preparing students for graduation, because it's no longer about your level of conceptual knowledge. I can go on AI all day long and have it summarize conceptual knowledge for me all day. That's not the important part right now. I think what, in particular, the system is going to have to shift around is how do we create problem solvers? How do we create people who can go through the system and understand how to access that conceptual knowledge and quickly put it into application to solve problems? And I think, we've seen cycles like this in the market before. So this isn't totally unprecedented. We saw it back in the early aughts with the inception of the internet. And how do you shift how does the market shift based on, your access to knowledge? And AI has sped all of that up. And so what happened around kind of the early aughts and kind of even in the mid, tens is you saw people who are getting more productive. It was increasing productivity, but it just changed the shape of roles. And what happened at that point in time is we kind of shifted away from this problem solving mindset. Like you've got to be more conceptual and all of that stuff. And so that people who are coming out of their educational careers were very good at transactional styles of work, taking an order, putting that into place. And I think that's no longer the baseline. I think the baseline now is that you have to be able to think and kind of work through the problem, because that's the part that humans are really good at. Like the AI and all that stuff out there, it has an upper limit. And where it typically reaches its upper limit is that ability to think in ambiguity and think contextually. It tends to circle around on itself when you get to that level of use. And so that skill is going to be really, really important for entry level people. And it's also going to be really important for institutions to recognize that you can't just teach people the book learning anymore. You actually have to teach them the application of those concepts in real world context.
On a different note, Angela, listening to you, when you think about AI, yes, it can help people get more productive, right? So you may be able to, instead of something where you needed maybe two people to do the job, you can have now one person supported with AI. But what I kind of want to throw in for everyone listening to stimulate their way of thinking, look at how many people are able to build new startups. enabled by AI, right? Everyone can nowadays build. So imagine now AI enables people to build faster. We become more innovative and they create new jobs, or because you build companies, right? Look at Lovable as an example. They have 2.3 million users. People who couldn't build before have the capability of building. Imagine some of these companies actually succeeding. They're going to create new, new
They're
jobs.
going to create new jobs. And what I'm seeing, even with the use of Lovable, because we've used that platform, as you know, Elena, to build our software and tool, and that would have been a limitation for us previously, but it's actually accelerating our ability to help people, which actually is causing us to hire because
Yes.
we need people to interact
Yes.
with machines. So we've actually created, just in our own company, at least 3 new jobs in the past 3 months, resulting from our ability to build this quickly and our ability to get this in the market. But it took us almost 2 years to develop the knowledge we needed to effectively build that. So it wasn't just something you can go in and say, "Hey, go build this." Well, I mean, you could, but it's at a really base level. But we had a very deep understanding of the problem we were solving and how to go about solving it effectively before we started programming it into the tool. And that's where you start to hit limitations in these tools. That's where you start to really, so you still need people who have subject matter expertise in the space. That doesn't go away, right? Because you have to be able to thoughtfully ask the machine questions and get it geared up in the right way. So we're essentially training the machine to understand what we're talking about. And where the technology currently is, it doesn't have enough memory to be able to hold all of those things that we've talked about. And so you are in a state where you have to remind them. And being in the data industry myself, one of the big challenges around AI right now is the cost. So you see all these big data centers being built and all of that. These are not yet sustainable businesses because of the cost of data storage, right? And so it can't store all of the memories it has, like the human brain stores the memories you have, right? So there are going to be some limitations because in order for those AI companies to be successful, they actually have to be cash flow positive. And so I think that, there's that balancing act of what's possible if you had infinite resources, but no company has infinite resources. These data centers take up huge environmental spans. They use environmental resources, energy, water, all of those things. And so there is an upper limit where it's going to stop because it's just not going to be feasible from a financial perspective for these companies to do more. And so that's where the human comes in, right? That's where the human can kind of say, okay, maybe you don't need to remember this specific thing because I can remind you of it, right? And so there's going to be a balance that happens there. And I think that's probably going to be established in the next few years when the technology settles out and everybody's kind of figured out how to use it. But having those types of skills, the ability to ask the right questions, the ability to really communicate specifically what you want, that's really important. The ability to maintain consistency in setting expectations and requirements and all of those things, those are all skill sets that are human skill sets. Um, and so I think it's important to recognize that if, as part of the skill building for this year, I'm starting to see in job descriptions things cropping up, like they're looking for somebody who is AI native. And what that means is that you can get into these AI systems and you're comfortable operating and learning and kind of, integrating fluently in them. And so I think as people think about how can I make myself more competitive in the job market, if you're not using AI, like it or hate it, this is something that you're going to have to know. Just like people 20 years ago had to know how to use email, that became a core entry requirement.
Yeah, and I think this is a very important point also to hear for PhDs and postdocs, because especially in academia, we sometimes have a little bit of we're sometimes a bit slower to adapt or adopt new things. Although I have to say we have it feels like a lot of AI-enabled platforms that support researchers have really a lot of them actually appeared on the market. But honestly, just being understanding Claude as an example, Angela, it's such a huge enabler. And just to understand how you can use these things, I can see how this can be such a big advantage just to know how to navigate these things, how to prompt, how to get your way around. And of course, there's much more to AI than just Claude.
Yeah.
But if you think about moving a
But
little
it's
bit
even
away from,
things like It's even
yeah,
things like Gamma, right? Gamma AI. One of
mm,
the things that we see in our program all the time is that PhDs struggle to put their presentations in an industry acceptable form. So for scientific researchers in the scientific communities, design of the presentation doesn't matter. So what we'll see in our kind of done for you job search program is when they get to presentation stage, they'll have like a very academic presentation that has no graphical design applied to it, and it looks unprofessional, even though that's an acceptable way of presenting in the scientific community. And nobody has ever given them like bad feedback based on that. When you shift over to a business environment, like nobody's going to tell you, I want a pretty looking presentation deck. But I can tell you from our experience, PhDs we coach who go in with a pretty looking presentation deck actually make it further than the people who don't. And that's one of the things we actually, as you know, help with in our program. And I think those PhDs are always surprised that when they have that really nice, clean graphic looking presentation, they feel more confident about going to present it, which I think is part of why that helps. But tools like Gamma AI, you can go and you can put all your ideas into it and it will go and it'll put it in a pretty layout, right? So I think what this does is it also helps people navigate their weak spots in a way that doesn't detract from the actual core value of what they provide, which is like a scientist doesn't really need to know how to design a pretty deck. They need to have rigorous science that helps with a solution. But the problem is that if you can't influence people, then you're not going to get your problem in the market. Or you're not going to get your solution in the market. So having a pretty deck, as silly as that seems, can help you influence people because it makes you come across more credibly. So, so those types of things, I think, they're game changers. And so the people who leverage those are going to be ahead. Now, what there also is that I want to like caution everybody in the market is kind of this concept of using AI to cheat, right?
mm,
And we're starting to see policies in job descriptions where companies are actually publicizing their policies around the use of AI. So here's our AI acceptable use policy. We don't use it to make decisions on candidates. We use it to summarize things, we use it to help surface things, but we don't use it to make decisions. And we see that happening in job applications themselves, where there's a link. Here's our AI policy, agree to our AI policy. We see that happening in actually the confirmation emails that go out after people apply to jobs that say, hey, we want to let you know that a real human will be reviewing your application. I've been saying that for years that AI doesn't do this. We got in this whole weird, misinformation cycle about AI use, and companies are catching on and they're updating their policies and they're updating their language to reflect that. But one of the big things that you see in those policies is we're okay with you using this to tailor your resume or help you better showcase your skills. But don't lie about your skills. Don't say you've done something that you haven't done. Don't use it during the interview process at all for any purpose. Don't have it up on your screen giving you answers while I'm asking you questions. And those are the areas that I think can start to get job seekers in trouble. And I think we'll see also that trend continue as more and more companies pick that up. There's also some early inklings that companies are concerned with avatars and kind of fake, you know, uh, deepfakes doing interviews for people. And there is some question among some employers about do they go back to in-person interviews so that they can avoid AI fraud, essentially. So I think there's some interesting developments around that whole cycle, but I think AI native is going to continue to grow and going to be continue to become more of a core requirement, just like, like I said, email and Microsoft Office at one point was in every job description. And now you see that fading away because it's just a standard. Everybody has it. And now you're seeing the same thing happen with AI.
I mean, I totally see why, Angela. I always like to say work smarter, not harder. And I think this is a little bit, it just reflects AI in one sentence, because at the end of the day, if you use it in the right way, it can support and accelerate whatever you do. So for example, you can sit and you can make this deck on your own, absolutely. But what if you could have someone who could just bring it in a pretty, nice shape from the beginning, and you start, of course, then editing on top and adjusting. But as a base, why would you make it harder on yourself? And it's just also something, I mean, I'm just learning how AI can really support you to be more productive. Yeah. It's,
Yeah.
and of course it's the ethical use that's a big one. And I think we're just in this transition period where everyone is figuring out what's okay, what's not okay, especially in the science space, right? Is it okay? Like when I wrote my thesis, I remember, Angela, I was in 23, AI just became a thing. And I was like, can I let ChatGPT read this and correct the grammar? I didn't know. Was it okay? Was it
Yeah.
not? Because there are no
There's
regulations around it, right?
Yeah. And I think we're also seeing that in terms of the jobs that are starting to crop up. The type of AI and machine learning and data focused jobs, it's no, it's no longer just about R&D. It's also about R&D, evaluation, ethical use. Can you productize these models? Can you make them work in a trustworthy and safe way? We're seeing that has been a major trend even early this year, is the shift from R&D, hey, we just need people to research models and figure this out, to, hey, now we need people to make sure that we've got consistency and it's working and it's reliable and all of those things. And I think, honestly, because so many PhDs have data fluency, this presents a huge opportunity for PhDs to break into the market. But it's really important that they're positioning themselves well, because in this market, I think we're going to continue to see that there are a lot of people looking for jobs. It's going to continue to be an employer's market, at least through the election in the US, which I know is affecting our job market here. Um, and I know that also has some ripples globally with the tariffs and everything that's going on. So I think that it's about how can you really highlight your data fluency in all of these roles, because I also think data fluency is going to really become something that's a requirement of the future. Those are going to be the people who are getting employed.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that you mentioned this, because, I would actually say I can speak about STEM PhDs now. I think they're all data fluent. But the funny thing is, you don't appreciate it as a skill. I
Yeah.
think that's the hard part, honestly. We just assume this is completely normal to look at data, ask the right questions, look at outliers. How do we treat
Right.
this? How do we clean this? How do I read this graph? And does this representation even make sense? All of these things that we're so trained to do. It's just, for me, it's like, okay, I look at things and I'm like, that's,
That's
it
just
just makes
normal. Everybody
sense.
knows that. Everybody knows
Yes,
that.
yes.
Yeah.
So it's a bit like, I think that's the hard part to realize. This is actually something that is wanted. It's a skill, and it's not normal that everyone just looks at data points and goes, okay, how would you treat these points? How do we, outliers, how do we treat them? Or should we apply, and maybe this is now very basic data, but
No.
median versus average, but understanding these basic concepts, not everyone does that. So, and I think
And
it's important to appreciate.
yeah, and I think also in that line, PhDs also assume that everybody has these like when they're competing against people who have industry experience for the same roles, they're assuming that, these people they're going up against have the same level of skill too. And so they go, well, I'm not going to be competitive for that role because these people are all going to have more skills than me. And the reality is that PhDs have a lot of depth in their techniques and a lot of breadth in their data techniques, and a lot of ability to like integrate new techniques quickly, because they have first principles of all of those things and they've been doing it for so long. Part of their job has been to really learn how to learn new models. and how to integrate new models. And that's not true of everybody coming up through industry. Coming up through industry, you're going to use a more defined, narrow set of models because you're going to use oftentimes models that have been developed by PhDs. You're going to read the papers, you know? And so you're not going to have that lived experience of learning the models in that same ground up way that PhDs do. And we hear that and I think companies are starting to get savvy to that PhDs have this bit of experience. And we've heard from, several of the people that I work with who have actually said, I went into this interview and one of the things that the hiring manager said was they were so excited about my ability to build models from the ground up where there was no precedent for it before that model, which again goes back to the problem solving things I mentioned earlier, where that ability to solve problems is going to be super, super critical for job seekers. And PhDs have that as just a baseline of their skill set.
So Angela, if you look at the roles that companies are hiring for right now, what do you think are the most in demand roles? And looking from a PhD perspective, because, PhDs, they have often a deep but also broad skill set. What are things that they could do to prepare for what's actually coming in 26, 27, and 28? Because I think we do see a shift in the type of roles. I would love to hear your opinion.
Yeah, AI and machine learning, that's a gravity ball. And I think it's just going to continue to grow and there's going to continue to be strong demand. I think in terms of that space, we're just going to see it continue to bloom, continue to blossom, and just take off. And so in terms of the preparation for PhDs, really get a solid grasp and start just breaking out what are all the things that I do in my day-to-day from a data perspective? What are the specific statistical techniques? What are the specific machine learning models that I use? What are the specific tools that I use? And make sure that they're really, really grounded in that, because that's good. Again, that's a core differentiator. Almost every PhD I talk to in our program when I'm kind of first evaluating whether they're a good fit has some level of that in there that, again, like you said, they just kind of take for granted. So start developing a repository of skills that, like, here are all the things I've done, because doing it retroactively is really hard and it kind of can break your brain a little bit. The second thing that I think is that health tech, careers in health tech, I think we're starting to see pharmaceutical, biotechnology, these companies really start to adopt the AI technologies. And so there's kind of this intersection happening right now between AI and healthcare that you're starting to see, an even kind of traditionally non-tech forward types of roles like clinical research. And I think we're going to continue to see that. In particular, folks with immunology skills, gene therapy skills, oncology, cancer kind of backgrounds. We're seeing huge kind of growth in those particular roles. That's one of the big areas that pharmaceutical and biotech are continuing to hire, and I expect that to continue. So I think that is really something that is a high value, really under kind of discussed area for STEM PhDs is the ability to go into data focused fields. And those kind of health tech roles can be a bridge. I think other indicators that we see there, you see some of the kind of upstream roles having more hiring in those areas. So like product manager for health tech and those types of things. When you start to see companies hiring product manager roles in specific verticals, it tells you they're starting to grow their capabilities and their technology in those spaces. So we see actually some of that. But I think those are kind of the two. Anything like data oriented right now is just really hot because there's a lot of demand for those roles and there's not enough supply. There's not enough people who know how to do this, and especially not people when I'm seeing some job descriptions that say, we want, people with 15 years of AI and machine learning fluency. Okay, well, that doesn't exist in the general market, but it does exist in the PhD market because PhDs have been researching this for years, for decades. So, PhDs are kind of on the front line of that discovery. So there's a unique advantage there if you can communicate it right.
Yeah, and I think honestly, Angela, I think you just said the keyword communicating it right. And unfortunately, this is where so many PhDs fall through the cracks and they are invisible because they don't communicate it in the right way. They don't market themselves in the right way. They may not even recognize what we talked about earlier, that whatever they have done is a marketable skill. They don't even talk about it. It would never even appear in their resume. So there is this huge, huge gap that we need to bridge. What can PhDs really bring and how can they communicate it better to employers? But also I really feel, and this is one of the dreams I have, educating employers on what a PhD can bring to increase the awareness of what they're going through. They're not just studying. And I think a lot of employers know that now. You can access knowledge that maybe you wouldn't find in the market. I mean, this is what researchers, scientists have been researching on. There's this gap. How can we communicate it better, to be honest? I mean, we see it in the program, right? Once they come in and we help them change the language around the things they've done, they get interviews and the person didn't really change. All that changed is that we elicited some information that they maybe didn't even talk about before, which now makes them maybe even uniquely situated to do something, which they completely ignored because they weren't aware. Oh, this is a cool thing. Really?
Yeah.
So
And I think that's a core difference between academic and industry communication styles. And there's real reasons for that, right? So, in academia, you're trained to communicate to a highly technical audience. And the more technically you communicate, the more credibility you have. And credibility is incredibly important in that particular field because what do universities sell? They sell knowledge, right? So it's important that that credibility is established. And that comes through using technical language. It comes by communicating in a very neutral, scientific way. But then when you switch over to industry, that's not how credibility is formed. Credibility is formed by your ability to establish relationships and trust with people. That's a very interpersonal style of communication. You have to have warmth in it. You have to kind of have banter in it. You have to have relatability in it. It's not so much about the knowledge you know, it's about your ability to make the way that you communicate it accessible and warm and relatable. And so, and I think that's a place that PhDs really struggle because they've spent so many years having all of that trained out of them. And again, it's not bad if you're going in the academic route. That's what's necessary. But in the industry route, your ability to influence people, it can be really limited by how well you connect and relate to those people. And it's been a complaint in industry for years. They talk about it's not what you know, it's who you know. But I would kind of counter that a little bit with it's not what you know, it's how you can build relationships with people. And so one of the biggest things that gets screened for that very first interview that you get with a recruiter, like I think one of the things that PhDs in our program are always surprised to find is like, they didn't ask me about a single technical skill. They just talked to me the whole time. And we talked about football or we talked about this other totally unrelated thing. And then they moved me forward, like weird. And it's like, yeah, because what they were screening for you is, are you relatable? And do they think the team would actually like you as a person? And I think that that's not something that you're going to read in an article. You're not going to read that in kind of literature about the hiring process and the job search process because frankly that type of hiring opens up a lot of risk for companies. But it's true, when you've been in the hiring room and you understand that likability is one of the key traits that get people hired, it's kind of like the unspoken criteria, you know.
to be honest, Angela, I mean, I totally, yes, it's not said out loud, but I think everyone who's listening in right now, I mean, just ask yourself, would you hire a person you don't like? I mean, it's a very simple question. And I guess for
Yeah.
most people, the answer is no. This is
Yeah.
the basis. I need to feel like I want to see you every day. I need to
Yeah.
feel
I
like
want to see
we
you
are
every day.
vibing. Yes, because otherwise, I mean, the whole point is this is teamwork, right? It's all about teamwork. This is not individual work anymore, which we do a lot in academia. So it's much more, you're an individual player. Now you're entering the game of a team sport. So liking
And
each other is quite an important, I mean, talk about team performance, which we could go in now where you can probably tell me about dynamics and stuff, because this is what you're an expert in. But it's just this whole concept that is also a bit foreign for us as
Yeah.
PhDs sometimes that you have to fit in a team. And in order to fit, the first thing is that we all somehow like each other, because if people don't like each other, I think it can lead to friction. Friction leads to non-productivity, and non-productivity means we're losing money, which is a bad thing, right?
You're losing money when work environments become toxic because the team doesn't like each other. You spend a lot of management time trying to remediate and fix that. You lose good employees, which costs it can cost up to 3 times the actual person's salary to replace them. Not to because every time you replace an employee, you're losing 70% of the knowledge they had about your company. Like, this is wildly important. And how well a team experiences a sense of belonging with each other is actually one of the number one factors of team performance. So this idea of likability in hiring actually does serve a business purpose. It's not just this fluffy, meaningless thing. It actually has performance implications for going in. So the other thing you asked, what can PhDs do to prepare? Think about your relatable anecdotes about things that you've done. Think about and this comes in the form, it comes in a few different forms. You'll see it crop up in the interview is, tell me about yourself. Why do you want to work for this company? Why this role? All of those are the same question, which is, why do you do what you do and why do you want to do it here? And it's not, I do what I do because I have the education to do it. The reason you do what you do you made a choice at a point in time to do this thing, and you continued to make a choice to continue to do this thing. So what is your purpose? What is your personal why for what you do? And, I think even in data and STEM roles, like the stories that I hear from clients about why they do what they do vary. Some of them are very deep and there's some deep personal attachment. Some of them are just like, I'm geeking out and I want to do something good in the world and I love data and it's boring and it's rote and it's like all of these things to normal people. But to me, it's a way for me to create impact and for me to help my community. Right? That saying it like that has no like deep connotation except that I'm a helper and I have an altruistic purpose that's linked to my job. Right? That's very relatable. Some people have personal experiences where they're like, I have this pivot point where I have this personal experience that somebody helped me by doing this thing and it shaped my whole career path. Right? Other people, got into something and then kind of fell into it. And when they fell into it, they were like, oh my gosh, this opened up a whole new world for me. Right? And so it's important to have that like relatable why of why you're doing what you're doing. It's not about, I want to come work here because the company is great. Everybody says that. It's not about, I want to work here because I'm good at what I do. Everybody says that. It's not about, I want to work here because I have all these degrees and credentials that make me good at this. It's not about any of that. It's about why you're personally connected to your work. And if you can kind of elicit that, it sets the vibe for the whole interview. And I think, again, going back to predictions for 2026, as we incorporate these new AI-based technologies, one of the things that I'm seeing is humans are thirsting for human connection. They're thirsting for it. So job seekers who are able to create that human connection are going to continue to be more competitive for jobs.
Yeah, and I think, of course, another aspect, right? If you are connected to what you do, I mean, you go up in the morning, you're excited. It's
Yeah.
it's a real amplifier to be excited about what you do, because you will show up in a completely different way if you're connected to the mission, and you will find creativity and innovative solutions in a way that you couldn't even think before. It's such an enabler, being in this state of
Right.
feeling connected to whatever you do. So yeah.
And when I come across somebody who is enthusiastic, who has aptitude for what I do, who is excited, and they pass that vibe during the interview, I'm going to hire them every single time just because I enjoyed the conversation so much. And because I enjoyed that conversation, I'm going to enjoy teaching and training them and getting them up to the level I need them to be at. And so, and again, remembering that your interviewers are human beings. And so if you can tap into those vibes, like I remember distinctly there was an interview that I did a few years back, and there were a couple of candidates, and one had every single skill we were looking for in spades. I mean, he checked every single box. But during the course of the interview, I was struggling to stay engaged. I was struggling to kind of connect with him. And that sounds harsh, but that's the reality of hiring. And then another candidate comes in with a lot of energy, maybe doesn't have a few of the skills I'm looking for, but is really enthusiastic, is excited, is geeking out on his type of role. And I'm like, yeah, that's the type of energy I want in my team. Right. And so I think I think that part cannot be understated. So when people are seeing, one of the things we see at Alma Me is that, communication skills are the number one skill listed across almost every single job. I think the number is like 85% of jobs or something like that have communications listed as a skill. And communications doesn't mean technical communications. Communications means your ability to interact, engage, and form relationships with people. Those are the type we're looking for. Interpersonal skills is what we're looking for.
So now you answered my next question, which was literally like, what do you think is the number one skill that we come across? And I want to go a bit deeper because I think it's so, so important for PhDs to understand what do they actually mean when they talk about communication and what are great ways to show that you're a good communicator, because this is one of the things. How do I show that I'm a good communicator? So first, what do they mean when they look for good communicators or when they say communication? And is there a way of demonstrating it?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've actually realized throughout my career is that the people who with the most expertise are often the people who use the least technical language to describe what they do. And by doing that, they make it accessible to a cross-functional team of people who are both technical and non-technical, right? Because you're able to give an overarching kind of thing that people understand. So, for example, in my line of work, I've been in operations side of businesses, and I'm a Lean Six Sigma practitioner. And so I can go in and I can say, so first, what I'm going to do is I'm going to conduct an FMEA, and that's going to help us prioritize. And I'm going to score the different things based on these different factors. And I'm going to go through and I'm going to weight it and I'm going to do all these things. That immediately caused my audience to tune out. But if I can say, you know what I want to go and do is I want to go and I want to figure out what the most common problems are and what the impacts those problems have in our business, both in terms of size and in terms of kind of importance, like frequency of what's happening. And then I want to come back and I want to understand what solutions are we using right now to solve those. So I just kind of want to create a library of problems and solutions that we have so that we can prioritize where we need to focus first in our improvement efforts. Totally different words, but the same story. And I bet when I said that, Elena, you actually understood what I was talking about the second time. And the first time you were like, what the hell?
Yeah, and I
So
think yeah, exactly. And I think it's so important for PhDs to understand that you will have a lot of these conversations where you have to actually make people buy into something, right? You want to convince someone that this is the way, or not convince, you want to influence, or you want to, you want to sell something that we should go in this direction. And you can only make people say yes if they even understand what you're talking about, right?
yeah, if you confuse them, that's the first thing out the door. In industry language, like in academia, technical language is a sign of credibility. Industry, technical language is actually like experienced as a barrier to speed and progress because you're spending so much time having to translate and trying to figure it out and get through confusion to get to alignment so that you can move forward. So the first thing that I would say is like, as you're going through and thinking about the techniques and the things that you've done, how would you explain that to an eighth grader? Like,
Mm.
how would you explain that concept to an eighth grader? You might use metaphors. One of the people I work with is really good at developing metaphors. And so he'll talk about in the kind of molecular biology and chemical engineering space, he'll explain it in terms that I understand when I'm talking to him. So he'll say, it's kind of like if you have a screen and you're trying to put, sand through a screen. here's what this means and here's what these things do. So he uses these metaphors where everybody knows what a screen is and everybody knows what sand is. So I'm going to describe it in those terms because it makes it easier to understand on the first pass of explaining it. That's part of effective communication. Being able to take ambiguous or complex topics and break it down into simple concepts that your grandmother could understand, right? That's effective communication. And then, like I said, just being able to be kind of human when you're communicating with people. So laying down, taking off that academic armor that has taught you I need to kind of shield myself and being a little vulnerable with who you are as a person to, this took me years to master because there was a point where I was like, I basically got told by one of my teams I came across as the ice queen whenever I was presenting in front of the team. But when I put that down and I said, I'm just going to go up there and I'm going to be my nerdy, geeky self, and they might not like me, and that's okay. I'm not everybody's not everybody's cup of tea. But yeah, I'm a geek when it comes to making big progress. And so I'm just going to geek out on that. And like, if they like it, cool. If they don't, fine. That's okay too, But coming to the table, and it's about authentic communication, keep it professional. So I like to refer to this as like professional casual. It's not how you're going to talk to your friends on the beach, but it's maybe how you're going to talk to a colleague when you're sitting back just having lunch in a coffee shop.
Yeah, and I think one last comment about the communication, because I know for a lot of PhDs, we're so factually correct. It's really hard sometimes to make these simplifications because they feel like it's actually incorrect what I'm saying here, right? Because all these details are missing. And in order to make it correct, you feel like, oh my God, I'm dumbing it down in a way that it's not correct anymore. I think that the important thing is maybe also to understand, unless it's in maybe medical R&D or whatever, it's not so super important to have it all factually correct because people just need to be able to say yes and understand what you do. The details are not necessarily important, right? This is maybe up to you. How are you going to implement that plan, Angela? Great, I understood what you want to do. How are you going to do it?
Don't care.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I don't care. I understood what you want to do. I buy into it. I love it. Go do it.
And I love what you just said there, Elena, because we see the same thing. We see that all the time, this desire to be overly precise so that you're factually correct instead of helping people develop a directional understanding of what you're trying to do. You're going to go and you're going to put all that precision in the back end. And in industry, they trust you to do that. That's why I hired you. I hired you to get all that precise stuff in the back. I don't need to understand it. I'm not an expert in the field, but I do need to understand the implications and risks, and I need to understand what you're doing at a high level so that if I get asked about it, I can explain it at a high level. I can rationalize it at a high level, right? And so, but the precision, I'm leaving that to the scientists. If somebody needs a more precise answer than I can give, I know I can bring you in to explain it, but that's not the level of detail that I need for decision-making purposes. And so the way that I kind of say it is if you explain this in a more simple way, is somebody going to die or go to jail? If the answer to that is no, take the simpler path.
Yeah, and I think as a last comment, I think is something also important, of course, right? When you talk about, because there are many different people you will communicate with, the person you report to likely will understand. You will likely maybe use a different language. You can come in with all your F4 or whatever you just mentioned. This is the right place to use that language because you speak the same language, right? But if you're in a big meeting where you have different parties, different people from different departments, they work in different roles, right? They don't have the same subject matter understanding.
Expertise, and they need to understand your work enough so that they know how it connects to their work. They don't need to understand how to do your work. And I think that's the key differentiator. And even for some people getting into the interview process or communicating with a hiring manager, assume that the hiring manager has that same level of expertise that they do. When I like to hire people who are smarter than me. I like to hire people who don't have overlap in certain areas with my existing team. I don't want replicates of each other. I want a holistic team that can fill in each other's gaps. And so I may not have the skill to talk at that level even as a technical person. And so I think that's important to recognize, and that's why it's important, I think, to start from the point of establishing directional understanding. If somebody wants more detail, they'll ask for more detail. If they want a more technical understanding, they'll ask the technical question. But I think also sometimes PhDs trying to explain everything all in one response instead of allowing conversations to breathe. And by that, I mean allowing space for questions to be asked and not like trying to answer every question all at once or kind of anticipating every question all at once.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know why we do that, but I'm also very good at this, adding a lot of detail and going on and on and on and losing myself in my own response. So clear communication is really, it is a skill. And honestly, very interestingly, you learn a lot when you do a podcast like this because you're forced to listen to yourself. And honestly, I recognize sometimes, I don't even know, can anyone follow what I just said? Because the way I said that, So it's, I think very few are natural, clear, structured communicators. So it's also something practice it, right? It's something practice it. It takes practice. It takes practice to simplify concept. It takes practice to find metaphors. But the more you do it, the better you will get. So it is a skill, even if you feel like, how am I going to master this? You can master it and you can actually apply it all day, every day. Explain something to your friends, explain something to your grandma. So it's definitely something people can build.
And I think the other thing, like one of the things that tell people is think of your talk track not as a script, think of it as a set of cue cards.
Mm.
Because I think also PhDs come into a lot of things very scripted, and that can throw conversations off wildly. So instead of thinking about it as a script, think about it as a set of talking points. And I tell people apply the rule of three. What are the three most important things that you need to get across to get the action or result that you're looking for? What is your objective for the conversation? And what are the three most important things for you to get across to get that action or that result out of the conversation? Because if you can establish that, that gives you like navigational stars. And if you're going off track, you can come back to your navigational stars and say, I got a little off track there. Here's what we're talking about, and just kind of bring yourself back on center. But I think that activity of going through and thinking about what are my three most important things can really help you simplify down. Like these are must haves. Everything else is secondary.
I love the approach instead of having this script in your mind where you get lost in all the detail. Okay, what are three talking points I want to talk about? And if I address these, I'm good to go. And I could talk forever, Angela, but it appears to me that we almost crack an hour. I just want to say thank you. It was really incredibly insightful. Thank you so much, Angela, for sharing your expertise. And I always appreciate, of course, because you're quite candid in your responses. I mean, we're not really working anywhere except for ourselves, so we can be really honest when it comes to the hiring process. So I think that's actually, yeah, it's really valuable to get this more raw view than, something that you're supposed to say, but actually, no, this is really how things work. So people actually have an opportunity to follow the right advice, rather what they think is the right thing to do. And yeah, I think for everyone listening, thank you so much. I just want to say, I hope we gave you something to think about or even act on as you explore your life beyond academia. And do not forget to check out the episode description for any links or resources mentioned today, including ways to connect with Angela and learn more about the work that we do at Alma.me, or just, connect with her on LinkedIn. If you found this helpful, please share it with fellow researchers or consider even subscribing or leave us a 5-star review, because that actually helps us to reach more people. And it's the easiest way for you to pay forward so other PhDs can find our podcast more easily. I just want to say thank you again.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on.